Ira,
Hey, just hey, hang on a
hello,
minute.
my friend.
How are you? Had to figure it. I always have to figure out where the sound's coming from.
Yeah, there's the speaker, the mic, there we are.
Yeah, there we are. So yeah. So how are you today?
I am brilliant. How about yourself, Ira?
Good. Yeah, excited. Every day is sort of a new day these days, and yeah, it's kind of. I looked up at the clock and it's like, holy crap! It's like it's time.
Where are you calling from?
Pennsylvania,
Okay, whereabouts?
Lehigh Valley.
Lehigh Valley.
Yeah, we're just south. We're about 15 miles south of Stroudsburg and 15 miles north of Bethlehem. So we're either near the Poconos or in Lehigh Valley. So
Okay, I'm in Rochester, New York, so not too
oh,
far
okay,
from
yeah,
you.
not too far. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Cool, cool.
So you
What's
get
that?
did you get some snow yesterday?
No,
Yeah.
it's actually been pretty nice.
Okay. Yeah, we actually had a few flurries this morning. So
Right. All right, a ski season soon. I think, during COVID, I'm like, maybe I'll pick up skiing, and then somebody was like, well. You know that like you have to go inside and prepare and get ready, and there's going to be like a ton of people around. I'm like, oh, I forgot about that part.
yeah, 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 cross country skiing maybe.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
Yeah.
Well, Ira, I'm so happy to have you here. I think it's pretty cool, this topic. I grabbed questions right from the profile
Okay.
because I thought
Yeah.
those were perfect. Like usually I
Perfect.
want to
Yeah.
get into like to something deep and not use those, but for you, I thought it was like exactly where I wanted to go with this and exactly what I would want to know. So is that cool?
I'm good with any of it. So
All right, all right.
I do my own podcast and most of them turn into conversations. So I'm good.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. All right, let me pull up the your sheet here. Hold on. Where'd it go?
And, gets lost in the sea of
W-
of tabs, right?
Yeah, it's probably already open. All right, hold on. And then I usually don't do Monday interviews only or podcasts only because it's like the busy day, but it's okay. Where the heck did it go? Give me 1 second. Where are you? Oh yeah, there it is. Okay. I kept opening it and didn't realize. All right, so Ira, let's I'm going to do your intro separately. All right.
Okay. All
And
right.
then in the meantime, we'll just have a conversation.
All right.
So thank
Sounds
you
good.
so much for being here, Ira. I really, really appreciate it. Calling all the way from Pennsylvania. Or first question I want to ask you today is a question I ask everybody. It gets a little sense of where you are right now. When you wake up in the morning in your life today, specifically, what is it about the day that just makes your heart sing out loud for the day ahead of you?
That's a great question. Hey, thanks for allowing me to be here.
Yeah.
Uh, it's I'm an older baby boomer. All my friends are talking about when you want to retire, slow down, and I've got a whole lot of things I want to do yet. I see a lot of hope, which is challenge in the post pandemic days or in the pandemic days. But honestly, there's just a whole lot of things that I want to continue to do. I enjoy my life, enjoy helping people, and there's a lot that needs to be done. And hopefully, I have the influence and the ability to be able to encourage people to keep going ahead. And you can either look at everything as a challenge or everything as an opportunity. And I tend to look at everything as an opportunity.
That's beautiful. So even at the what you call the older baby boomer age, you're still growing and still learning. What have you ever has that been the way your way for like ever, or was there like a time where there was a lull and you weren't progressing or you weren't growing and learning?
That's an interesting question. For the viewers, for listeners and viewers, I guess, the if you're familiar with not what we call, but what's called the growth mindset, a fixed or a growth mindset, pretty popularized by the work of Carol Dweck. That's Dweck, and you can just look up mindset. She wrote a book. She was studying kids and wanted to know why super successful kids, the valedictorians in the class, weren't always the most successful. And what they found was is that, and I fell victim. It's a long way around there, but I sort of was victim to that. I wasn't valedictorian, but I was, near the top of the class, successful, got a couple degrees, a couple professions, and have always done well. But the reality is we got to the point, including myself, that you start to protect that. You stop taking chances.
Mm.
You don't ask that question, that because gosh, they're looking at me as the expert, and if I ask that question, does that knock me down a couple pedestals? Maybe, it's like, hey, I thought you were the expert, and now you're asking that question, therefore maybe we don't have as much confidence in you. But we all fall trapped, in that trap. In college, you don't take certain courses because you won't get the you won't get the A. We don't want to take that position because what if we don't get it? And there, on the flip side of that is that's the fixed mindset. So we sort of live in our bubble and start to protect our image. And the growth mindset is a constantly learning and unlearning. Hey, we don't have to be perfect. Hey, we can be vulnerable. We need to ask those questions. We need to be curious. We need to fail sometimes. We need to fall on our face. And the willingness to be able to continue to grow is an essential skill. I mean, we all need that today. So long way, or really long way around your question,
Yeah.
but was I always that way? No. I mean, I always was learning. I mean, I've got multiple degrees. I've, I'm an avid reader, not of books, but of articles and things, just to find out what's current. So I was always learning, but it was always sort of to protect the image. And were there times I should have tried something? Should I have taken a course? And hey, if I didn't do well, so what? Should I have tried a hobby? If I didn't do well, so what? Yeah, absolutely. And it took me probably half of my adult life to figure that out.
Ah, okay. Which leads me to this. So you talked about the fixed mindset, and you talked about the growth mindset. 2020, what a freaking year, right? Like that's just to put it bluntly. Um, how can somebody in a fixed mindset be affected differently than somebody in a growth mindset in a year like 2020? And will we ever get back to normal? If you want to elaborate on those two questions there.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So let's go back to normal. Okay.
Okay.
First of all, I wrote an obituary to normal. So
Mm,
you can, so anybody who's on LinkedIn, you can look that up. Actually, even if you're not on LinkedIn, it shows up. So if you search for obituary to normal and Ira Wolfe in Google, I'll come up.
okay.
But basically normal died. We're still grieving it. There's never been a time in human history that we've gone backwards. Even when the glaciers, the ice age, we didn't go backwards because when we came out of it, it was a new world. It was different. So it's going to be different. There is no going back. I was reading some articles over the weekend, where people are waiting to say, "Oh, I can't wait to go back to the theater. I can't wait to go back to the office." It's not going to be the same when you go back to the office. There's not going to be all the people that were there. There's going to still be, at least for a while, some social distancing. People that are going back to the office now thinking that's the normal part are literally in the office on Zoom calls because you can't crowd that many people into the meeting room, or half the people are still working from home, or now it's a global or a distributed workforce because you hired people from around the country, around the
Mm.
world. So going back to normal is just not going to be a thing. So we have to move forward. It's going to be different for sure. Will it become normal? Yes. And I've been searching. It's funny that we're doing this today, but I've been searching for another word because I don't like the new normal. I don't like the new next. I've got a friend who came up. He just published a book, John Sinet. It's called Future Next. I've got another Jason Aver book. Another friend of mine calls it the now normal. Everybody's trying to come up with what's the word. Everybody's uncomfortable with this new normal, because new normal means that, oh, we're gonna move from A to B, and B is going to be static. It's going to be comfortable. It's going to be something we're familiar with, and that's not true. I mean, because what I came up with just over the weekend is that we're living. This is like a wave. Is that it will be the next wave of normal, and then the wave's going to crest and it's going to go down just like it does in the ocean, and then there'll be a new wave, and we're going to be living on these waves of normal. So people are going to have to become comfortable with change. They're going to have to become comfortable with uncertainty. It's not going to be as predictable as it was before.
Mm. Yeah. It's just as you say that, it makes me think about um how most likely people that are not comfortable with change and don't enjoy change and don't enjoy the unknown as much aren't handling this as well as the people that are okay with change or something different, right? I mean, does
Yeah.
that do you think that comes from like just our own personalities, or is this something we can unlearn to become more comfortable with change? I guess, or if you can't
Yeah.
even be comfortable with change, I don't even know if that's a right
Eh, eh,
statement.
Again, lots to unpack there. So one is, yeah, we definitely can unlearn it, and that's actually one of the new skills that we have to learn how to do.
Oh,
We have learned to learn. Going back to that fixed mindset, it's like, oh, you need to learn, you need to acquire more knowledge, you need to become the expert. Lifelong learning, and that assumes that we just keep piling on more and more and more information. The problem with that is that we eventually run into a situation where something we learned today conflicts with what we learned 5 years ago or last year or 10 years ago. And we have to basically figure out what what worked, what did we learn from the past, but doing it the exact same way, as Einstein said, is doing the same things over and over again is the definition of insanity, um, and expecting a different result.
thanks for yeah.
So part of that is that we need to learn, but we need to unlearn. The way we used to do certain things isn't going to work anymore. So that's that part of the question. The other part, does it have to do with personalities? Yeah, I mean, that's my business, Success Performance Solutions. We do pre-employment and leadership testing. We're constantly trying to figure out what we do for companies. We help them figure out, do people have the right behaviors, the right personality, the right abilities, the right motivation, the right values to kind of fit in your organization? And absolutely, there are people that are more comfortable with change than others. There are people that thrive for change. If you're familiar, if anybody out there is familiar with like the DISC profile, DISC,
Yeah.
D's and I's, D's love solving problems. So if there's not a problem, they'll find one to solve, or if they've got a little psychosis in them, maybe they'll make one, to find. But and I's are really super optimistic. The glasses always half full, so it's yeah, let's try that. We'll see what happens. Where the S's and the C's or some are looking for a little bit more calmness. It's not that they're opposed to change, but they don't just pursue change for the sake of it. And C's are afraid of the emotion driving a C behavior, which stands for conscientiousness or compliance, is fearful of making a mistake. So yeah, our personalities and our behaviors absolutely impact that. But here's the crazy thing about this pandemic. Um, and it was happening. It was going to happen anyway. It was going to happen with technological disruption, and the pandemic just came along and accelerated that.
Mm.
What's crazy is that everybody's now uncomfortable with change. Even the people who I did my TED talk on that I've danced with change my entire life, and where my wife and family and mother and a lot of other people just aren't, and colleagues aren't as um, comfortable with it. Or let me just say this: I'm not sure it's comfortable with it. They're they're not. They're less comfortable with it. And I'm just less comfortable or less uncomfortable with it than they are. That's all. Everybody, I've listened to so many webinars, the Zoom fatigue, but I've listened to so many webinars from super smart people. And everybody is basically saying, we need to learn how to fake it till we make it. And that doesn't just necessarily mean we're just throwing everything to the wind, because there are tools and techniques and things that we all need and skills to mitigate, to minimize the risks. But we're all going to have to become more comfortable with risk and uncertainty. So yeah, I mean, personality impacts it, but it can't be an excuse anymore. I mean, for a long time, people just say, listen, our employees aren't comfortable with change, or I'm not comfortable with change. So we're going to take it one step at a time. And the problem is when time and space and the environment's running a sprint and we're trying to go out for a casual walk, we're going to get left behind. And that's the problem. The problem that we face now is not the amount of change that we're experiencing, but the pace at which we're experiencing so much change. And we're still living, individuals are still living in this linear world. So is business and government. We're still expecting that we're going to go back to this normal. This is just a blip. And then we're going to go back to this nice, steady, incremental pace of change, where in the reality is everything's just on this on this hockey stick going up, and it's getting faster and faster. And the pandemic just accelerated that. It's pretty amazing when you think about it, how quickly we all adapted. I mean, we're, universally we say we're not comfortable with change, and there's certainly people that are suffering, they're out of work, and I don't want to make light of that. But the reality is that within about a 2-week period, we adapted pretty well. And, other than restaurants and hotels and travel, transportation, the reality is there's still 100 million people employed in this country. There's still businesses. I just read last night that Amazon hired more people since the beginning of the year than the total number of employees at Home Depot.
Mm.
I mean,
So
it's like, how does that happen in a recession? I mean, it in the typical recession, in that mindset that we used to be in, it's like a recession, every business is down.
It's weird to call it, like, to say even a recession because the stock market's like
Yeah.
hot. You know what I mean? So can you, is that
I'm not
an
even saying
indicator? Yeah,
Or
it
is a recession. It's a recession and a depression for a part of our economy.
Yeah.
So we're not making
Weird.
light of that. We can't say that, oh, we're not in a recession because the stock market's up.
Right.
Well, only 40% of the people are actually invested in the economy.
Right.
And even fewer than that are invested as individuals. I mean, because they're invested because they have a pension or something from a company, somebody else is sponsoring it. But the reality, you're right. I mean, we literally have two economies. We have people that are living in
that's
the
interesting.
depths of the depression, and then we have other people that are living, doing pretty well.
That's really interesting to think about, because there's probably never been a time in the past where this has been like that, living in two economies. I have never heard anybody say it that way, where, like you're right. There's some people who are thriving, doing well because of the shift to Zoom and shift to more people using the internet and the shift to buying more products on the internet, and people that do have a job and people that are still working tend to have more money right now because they're not spending it on traveling, and they're not right. So they're spending it in different ways. It's really interesting to say that there's two different economies happening right now. Wow.
Yeah. Well, and I guess there's so much within that, is that, yeah, I think there is. And there were people talking about it before, because we talked about pay inequities, social injustices, gender pay gaps. I mean, so there technically was always there, except it's been exacerbated. It's right to the forefront. And the pandemic pretty much democratized it, because there are I mean, when you think that frontline workers, who are typically the ones who are laid off first, are now are essential workers, that they're secure in their jobs. If you work for a grocery department, a grocery store, if you work for a distribution center, if you work for hardware, um, you're pretty secure in your job. You, you've got a job. A lot of professionals aren't. There's physicians, there's nurses, there's attorneys, there is accountants that are struggling, engineers, there's professionals, highly degreed, highly educated people that are now on the outside looking in. So what is different? This is an interesting conversation. What's interesting in this two economies is, in the past, there were basically the frontline workers, the lower income, certainly got hit hardest, and to some degree they still are. Um, but universally, it was sort of the wealthy's income just lowered a little bit. Their dividends, they didn't get as many dividends, and their stock and their capital gains didn't go up as much. But everybody's wages and salaries and life was depressed. Now you got the whole group that's thriving, you got some are suffering, and the socioeconomic differences with those is not as great. It's still pretty substantial when you think, and especially when we think about schools, education. If we talk about how the pandemic has hit middle or upper class regions, communities versus inner cities, they're certainly struggling because they didn't have the resources. They don't have the internet. They don't have the technologies. They can't afford some of the things that we need at home to be able to teach. But outside of that, there's definitely a democratization of failure, of being penalized, because the virus didn't pick, didn't choose classes and races and genders. It hit everybody.
Right. Right. And how about unlearn going back to unlearning? How do we unlearn it? Do we just say, okay, just do we trick ourselves into accepting to unlearn, or is there, what do we do?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of things. I don't think it's there is a process, and I'm not the expert in mentoring people how to unlearn,
Mhm.
because one is, it's still evolving. It's a relatively new concept. A lot of people haven't even heard of that. And it doesn't necessarily mean forget everything that you did. It's not a brain dump. I, my first career, I was a dentist. I don't know if you knew that, how far
Oh,
we went
no, I
back.
didn't.
So yeah, so I actually practiced for 18 years. I loved everything about dentistry but dentistry, and I left. I loved the entrepreneur. I loved building the business. And you can go to listen to any of my other podcasts and interviews, and you can hear about that story.
Well,
But
I
I
have a question just to start. Is it just is so random? But I like always heard or through the grapevine that like that suicide rate for dentists was always high. Is that true? Or if it is, like why is that?
Yeah,
So random, but I'm just
it's a little bit more of myth than, there were certainly, in all my years of dentistry, and again, I'm an older boomer. I graduated dental school like 40 years ago.
cool.
Um, and I actually practiced after I had a residency and stuff, and I was in private practice for like 15 years,
Okay.
and then I left. But in all that time, I only know of one dentist that might have committed suicide. And it was debatable. He had a car accident, and some said, "Oh, he was depressed and he ran off the road," because it was like 1:30 in the morning. He was at that time, he was he was he was in his 60s, and I think 29 or 30 when he passed away. So, at that point, he was an old guy. Now it's pretty young to me. But they said, what was he doing like at 1:30 in the morning on this back road? Why did he run off? He was depressed, and they assumed he committed suicide. I know of other people who have been that, but that they said they've committed suicide. But I actually don't know any personally.
Yeah.
So it's not an epidemic. I'm not sure if it's of higher risk than any other profession. At one time, maybe it was, going back, and then it's just one of these wives' tales that sticks around. But I think it's a wives' tale. Mental illness. It's also mental illness is is pretty widespread within the population, and we're finally starting to talk about it. It's finally not something that doesn't get discussed. So I think if dentists were the number one profession suicide, who committed suicide, it was probably because no one else was talking about it.
Because no, that's interesting. Sorry to throw you off path. It
Yeah,
was just so that's always been
yeah,
something. In
yeah. Somebody was
I'm
thinking about
I'm testing
it.
your adaptability quotient right now. That's what I'm doing. um,
It's pretty good.
so you use the word adaptability quotient. I don't think you used it in this conversation yet, but
No,
you've used it on your site. What is that like? The future of work and the
yeah.
adaptability quotient. Like, what is that all about?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So, we've talked about adaptability. We talked about flexibility in the past. We want people to be flexible. We need to be adaptable. It was never, it was desirable, I would say. It was helpful, but because the world around us was changing at this linear rate, and things, new technology came in, and it took a generation or two sometimes for it to totally go mainstream. And again, all of a sudden we're living in this world where today is the slowest pace of change that we'll experience for the rest of our lives, which is frightening for some people and exciting for others. What the adaptability quotient is science. Through science they were actually able to measure that, like IQ, which is our intellectual quotient, and then EQ, which is our emotional intelligence or our emotional quotient, that we needed to improve our soft skills, how we relate to others, and how we control our own emotions. What adaptability quotient is, they were able to identify through research 15 different dimensions that actually help people get more comfortable with change, and live, and basically not just cope or fail because of the change, but learn how to survive and thrive in spite of the change. And part of that turns out to be what we talked about before. Unlearn, the ability to unlearn, not just to acquire more knowledge, but the ability to unlearn. The other thing we mentioned was the growth mindset. We need to be okay. We need to become vulnerable. We need to be okay with taking some, not taking chances, but learning. When we're learning something new, we may not be perfect. We may make a mistake. We may make a choice, and it may not work out, and we learn from that mistake. And that's that learning and unlearning part. So they sort of all blend together. Could you unlearn without a growth mindset? Probably not. There's also a something called mental flexibility, which is another measurement of adaptability quotient. And mental flexibility, I used to call it dealing with ambiguity. And the best way to explain dealing with ambiguity is turn on Fox News and turn on MSNBC at the same time and make sense of it.
You can't.
Well, that's a
What?
skill that we're going to learn how to do. Is
Yeah.
they both they're both saying it's a they live in a binary world. It's right or wrong.
Mm.
And were there some things that they say on MSNBC get could be true, and if and are there things on Fox that could be true? And I listen to both. I favor one over the other, but I do subscribe, and I do listen to opposing points of view, and oftentimes and go, that's a good argument. I didn't think of it that way. I may not agree with the philosophy. I may not agree with the politics. I may not even agree with the morality of it. But then you put yourself in their shoes and say, if I was standing in their shoes, what what am I seeing that they're not? It's a question I ask in my I'm teaching a graduate class in organizational change, and I pulled out a book that when I took my master's was called The Prepared Mind, and there was a list of questions. And one of the questions that stuck with me, it hit me then 20 years ago, and it hit me, and it still sticks with me. What am I not seeing? What part of my mental map of my values and my mindset and the people that I hang around with, are preventing me from seeing something that I should be seeing that may change my decision, or maybe it changes my approach to making that decision. But there's a piece of information that I don't know. So what I hear if I listen to Fox News, I'm not necessarily looking to see what's wrong and how crazy they are, but which sometimes I believe that. But I also could see that sometimes on the MSNBC side. But I see something and go, man, I that's interesting. I mean, I could see where some people might believe that. And then it becomes, what's our strategy to engage them? Or how do I blend that thinking with my thinking? And as a leader today, I mean, moving forward, you think about, very highly likely, 99.9999%, Joe Biden will be president. How does he bring these two opposite sides together? How do you get a common thread? And it's not just an average of the two, because averages won't work, because you're still going to have the diehards on one side and the diehards on the other. But how do you find the common thread and at least get some of the people to say, aha, I see where they're coming from, so they just don't hate me. Maybe there's a way that we can figure it out. So this degree of mental flexibility, this mental agility, some people call it, dealing with ambiguity, which means dealing with uncertainty. They're all going to be skills that, in order to survive, everybody needs, and they're all part of this adaptability quotient. It's sort of a formula, and it gives people a roadmap that, hey, if something's not working, there's hope. It's not like, oh, I'm not very good at this. I'm not very good with change, therefore I'm going to fail. No, you can, and the good news is it's learnable.
It's learnable, right? And it could be as simple, in my non-professional opinion, as picking up a book and reading about it. Right, when the Black Lives Matter movement was really put out there this year, I grabbed two books about history, and I read them, and I grabbed it on white supremacy and I read it, and I was like blown away with things that I wasn't. This goes along exactly with what you're saying. So for people listening, get an idea of it. Um, I was like, wow, I was only seeing that from my perspective, from my
Yeah.
experience, not from, someone else's experience and perspective. And that, sometimes and that has to do with the whole unlearning, right? And adaptability is sometimes we get so narrow focused that what we think is so right. Like, let me ask you, 10 years ago, um, 10 years ago, today, do you know more about certain things than you did 10 years ago? Of
This week I know things that I
right
didn't.
this week, right? So
So
to think that we know so much already, and know we're always right about everything, and is just in Einstein, a new definition of insanity.
yeah, yeah. So again, older baby boomer, I can roll the clock back. And I remember, so there's some things that stay the same. When there were the riots this summer, they were burning down the cities. It certainly wasn't the right approach, not something you want to see. But I also remember, and I was in high school at the time, when they were burning down cities. I remember riots in Chicago. I remember they were burning down Philadelphia, New York, Washington, Chicago. I remember the 1968 Democratic Convention, and they were literally rioting. They were burning down the city. It didn't matter if it was white or black. They were the rest. They were basically the police versus basically youth were mostly those rioting. But there was also a lot of racial injustice. I mean, John, he just passed away. John, I want to say Martin, from Atlanta. Uh,
I'm not going
I
to be
just
able to
got a
give you
brain
that answer.
freeze. Yeah, I just gave a brain freeze. He was a congressman. And basically, there they led the riots. Martin. I was alive with Martin when Martin Luther King was alive, and part of it was, yeah, I see the rights, but were my views a little bit racist. I grew up in a coal mining town, all white. The closest black family was 50 to 70 miles away. Yeah, I probably grew up a little fearful of that. And that, boy, that was a bunch of ungrateful people that we gave them a chance. And, they had a right to vote and they had a right to work. And if they chose not to get a good education, it was their fault. And it's like, now it's a little bit embarrassing that that was the mindset that we had. And there's still a lot of people that have that mindset. I
Right.
still hear it. I heard friends of mine, colleagues, family members with that mindset of when the riots and what Black Lives Matter was about. And, you can't expect everything overnight. And the only reason that there's equality in colleges is because it's regulated, and there's white, there's bright white students not getting a chance to go to school because of affirmative action. And it's like, okay, is that a racist comment or is that truth? And it's both. The reality is they've gone back to our mental flexibility,
Right. Right.
both in that. So I mean, this is getting pretty deep, but I've
Yeah.
I've interviewed a bunch of people. I got my podcast, and last week, one of the last episodes I did, I had Torrin Ellis, and very, very outspoken. And I've had other speakers on a few months earlier. I had Michael Taylor, and it's really, really interesting. And the one thing that I would say that I learned in the last few months that I didn't fully appreciate before
Mm.
is that when my kids walked out of a house or my grandkids walk out of a house, I want them to be careful. Don't be crazy driving. Don't do something stupid. But I never, ever, ever, ever said, hey, if you get stopped, make sure you put your hands at 10 and 12 and do whatever the policeman says. Now, I didn't want them doing something stupid, but the reality is the difference was if they were white, there wasn't a risk that they were going to get a gun pulled on them. And if their skin was dark, if they were black or brown, it's a very different scenario. And like you, I've read a couple books. There was a great movie out with her last name's Washington. Used to be on Scandal. It's
Oh
I
yeah, the main character on Scandal. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah,
yeah,
great show.
Kerry Washington.
Gary
Sorry,
Washington.
I
Yes,
kept
thank you.
saying I kept thinking of Kelly. Kerry Washington, great movie. I think it was on Netflix,
Oh,
and it was a Broadway play actually, and it was her. It was like four people. It was her husband, who was a white police officer. He was like a lieutenant, and you never even saw the black son, but the black son was basically arrested and hospitalized. So I won't tell you the rest of the story.
right.
Um, but it was the dynamics of that. And in that, she kept saying, but you don't understand when you go, every time he went out, I worried that even for a taillight or just because he was driving down this, he was in a nice car. And they were a well-to-do family. And I think he drove a BMW or a Mercedes. Because he was black in a BMW or Mercedes, he must have stolen it. Those are the things that sort of took you out of the zone. And that's the learning and unlearning. And again, I'll say it again. I'm not only an older baby boomer, an older white guy baby boomer. So, and
Yeah.
still learning. It's still learning and saying, so there's things that were done that need to be changed. And how do we do that? I mean, we're talking about leadership. How do we make that change among our peers and also amongst the next generations?
You ever find it frustrating when there's people that just don't want to change. They're like just so stuck
Yeah.
in their ways that what do you do? Like, I don't even know if you can give an answer to this, but since we're on that topic,
Yeah,
what
I'm
do you
probably
do
the
with
last
those?
person. I mean, I'm pretty frustrated
Do you
at
just punch them in the face? I mean, what do you do? No, I'm just kidding.
yeah.
What do you? No, like,
Well,
because I
it's interesting.
it does.
That leads into adaptability quotient back
Okay.
again. Okay, because we covered three dimensions. We covered mental flexibility, we covered growth mindset, and we covered unlearning. The other two dimensions that fall under one of the umbrellas, which is called abilities. These are things we can learn to do differently. One is grit, and one is staying focused on the long-term goal. All right. So grit is we have a purpose and we have a focus and we have a vision and we're focused on that and we'll walk through a brick wall to get there. That's what grit is. But you also have to accept that if we're trying to walk through these brick walls and we're trying to pick these ambitious goals and life purposes, that we're going to have some setbacks and we're going to have some failures, and that's what you're talking about. And that's resilience. And resilience is the ability not just to bounce back. We're not just weebles. If you remember what weebles are, or the old punching bag. You fall over, you go back. You fall over, you go back. We need to learn how to hit a setback and go forward. And when people just don't want to change, we heard a lot of that in the election. We're going to hear a lot of that going forward. It's like, why can't people just see that there's a better way? Why can't they just be more open-minded? We as as the leaders, have to not only keep our eye on the ball, but we also have to be resilient. That's just a setback, and we have to learn how to become smarter and navigate around that. You also answered before, does personality pay into that? And it certainly does. There are people that have better self-control than others, and people that are a little bit more impulsive may get frustrated and angry when that happens. And again, that's tying this back into emotional intelligence. We need to become better at that. We can't look at people as that they're evil people just because they see something a different way. So adaptability is all these things wrapped up in one. It's grit, resilience, mental flexibility, growth mindset, and unlearning. And is one more important than the other? Resilience is actually the biggest driver of adaptability. It's the ability to come back from setbacks. It's the ability to bounce back or bounce forward. But you can't be resilient without grit. You can't be resilient without having your growth mindset.
Right.
Or you
Ira,
can't adapt. Yeah.
yeah, I love that. And what you say, just to kind of round it up there, with a thought, is just like 2020 pandemic, right? It's the whole idea is not how hard, the saying, it's not how hard you fall, it's how you get back up, your resilience, right?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of people that are falling hard in 2020, mainly emotionally and mentally, I think.
Oh, for sure.
And and it seems like they sometimes they get deeper and deeper, especially now as the numbers on the news and in the election and Trump not giving over to Biden and all this stuff happening continues. It just sometimes they're falling deeper and deeper when at some point you have to pick yourself back up, use your resilience, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and
Related.
no, absolutely. So resilience is part of it, but one of the things why adaptability quotient is so important, and this fit you queued it up perfectly. Thank you. Um, is that when the more adaptability you have, the higher your AQ, and again, whether you get it measured or not, but the higher your AQ is, the more adaptable you are. It in uh, by being adaptable, it means you have hope that there's a better future. We started this conversation. What am I, when I wake up in the morning, what keeps me going? And part of that is hope, because there's hope for a better future. But it also, by being adaptable, by having AQ, is you have the courage to do that. You have the confidence to do that, because in order to have that open mindset, you have to be confident. You have to be confident in that, hey, I'm going to make a mistake and I'll fail, but I'll rebound. I'm going to get up. So, and I'm going to get up because I got resilience. So it basically, what AQ does is it gives us hope. it gives us courage, it gives us a positivity in our life, a positive outlook. It allows us to see challenges as opportunities. So AQ is really important. Not just it's just, oh, I need to build up my AQ to survive. It changes your whole perspective. It
Mm.
gives you hope, courage, and positivity.
Now, is this all in your book that you have called
Oh,
"Recruiting in the Age of Googlization"? Is that the
no, it's
main?
actually not. And talking about change, how fast things change. Uh, yeah, recruiting in the age of Googleization is actually two books in one. The
Yeah.
first part of the book is about change. It wasn't about adaptability per se, but because adaptability, the AQ actually, the science and my involvement in it has actually just happened over the past year.
Mm.
So but what was going to happen, why we were going to need to adapt and change was literally, even if you're not in recruitment, the first 130 pages is all about what the world was going to look like. And then the pandemic came, and I was predicting it was going to look like this in 2025, 2030. And the reality is the pandemic crushed 10 years of digital transformation into like 3 months. So a lot of things that were going to happen in the future happen now. So if you want to find out kind of where we are, how fast things are changing, get a model for the change, the first half of the book's there. The last half of the book was, hey, this is how we're going to have to find talent within that. But if you're not in recruitment, you're not in HR, you don't hire people. The first part of half of the book is all about
Well, it could
it's
give you
all
an
about the
idea of what people are looking for right now, and
yeah.
how people might start looking. So who you might need to become or be to get a job, right?
Yeah, I mean, in there, I talk about autonomous vehicles. I talk about, even an HVAC tech. What's going to be like in 5 years when when you get your air conditioner goes down, your heat pump goes down. Those are really computers. It just happens to be a computer in a little box,
Mm.
and it's all connected to Internet of Things. Does the HVAC tech show up at your house before you know you have a problem? Because they're on the Internet of Things, and they're monitoring a sensor remotely, and they notice there's a bad board there, and if we don't fix it ahead of time, they're going to call us tomorrow because they don't have air conditioning. So I talk a lot about that, and again, that gives people hope. It gives people say it's not all bad. Technology's not all bad. The pandemic was bad. It killed a lot of people. It hurt a lot of people, but it wasn't the pandemic that caused this. This was all happening. The pandemic just accelerated this change, and the change is going to continue to happen. So I guess my message is, you can either decide you're going to be in despair and try to fight the world, or you can be hopeful and find the courage to kind of thrive. And obviously there are people thriving in this new world, and we don't even know what it is yet.
Yeah, I love that message, Ira. There's to go along with that. I have just a couple days ago, I was reading and I saw a great message. Like, instead of thinking there's a doom and gloom event happening around the corner, believe that there is something marvelous about to occur. And switching that whole mindset instead. Um, Man, this was so good. I appreciate everything that you shared today with us.
Yeah, it was fun. Good
Um,
great I love these conversations again, because it does impart some hope, and for people.
Yeah. There was something I was going to touch on, but first I'll have you answer this question for me. If you can go back and ask, or not ask, tell your 18-year-old self any kind of information, any advice, anything, what would you let them know?
Oh wow, I got a long list.
What do you think would be most beneficial for them, for your 18-year-old self to know back when you were 18?
Don't be afraid to fail.
Mm.
Yeah. Again, at 18, my goal was to get to college. College was to get to dental school. Dental school was to open a practice. I mean, and there were a lot of things in there, and mistake or failure was kind of a ding on me, my personality. I guess the other thing was, and I learned, and I learned this quickly. Not, I won't say quickly, but I certainly learned it decades ago. You are not your job title. When I left dentistry, people said, well, what are you going to do? They said to me, she's now an ex, but they used to say to my ex-wife, how could you let him do that? What will he be? And it's like, hey, a dentist was just a job title. That wasn't who I was. And
That's
and I
so
and
good.
and I think that we still get tied up in that. The first thing that we ask people is, we ask somebody young is, what do they want to be when they grow up? And then when they're in college is, what's your major? And when we meet a stranger at a dinner party, or when we ever get back to that, we say, what do you do? And those are really fixed mindset questions.
Yeah. Yeah, two things. One, for all the stay-at-home mothers listening, you're not like, that's not your title, right? So I want to say that because, like you said, I wasn't a dentist. I was just me, and dentist was my job. Same thing with mothers that stay at home with their kids. Sometimes they can feel caught up like that's all they are, and that's their title. That's who. But that's just what you do, right? And you're much more than that.
Oh,
And I think
that's the toughest, most underpaid job in the world.
right, exactly that
Just,
too.
I think a lot of fathers, or I think a lot of working mothers, learned that over the last 6 months.
Mm,
It's really hard being home with your kids all day long, being teacher, being parent, being mentor. It's really hard. So,
yeah, my wife's
very underpaid.
homeschooling and she's a stay-at-home mom, so I see it. Yes, and I'm here to see it. And I feel her as much as I can.
Yeah.
And so yeah. And then I think that, is there anything you want to say or add or share? Is there something new that we could look at? I know you kept talking about, first I want the adaptability quotient. How can we learn more about this? How can
Yeah.
we get more info on that?
No, you can want to go to my website,
Okay.
Success Performance Solutions, right behind me. Right at the top, there's a button. You can click on that. I think there's actually, we're running some master classes, and if anybody's interested, you
Okay.
can actually type in adaptability.expert. So like right in your domain, adaptability.expert. It'll go directly to the pages that talk about it. I actually wrote the origin of my TED Talk, which became my book, was called "When the Shift Hits Your Plan." That was the original title of the book, by the way. When the Shift Hits Your Plan. I just re-edited the ebook. I created a little video, and so if you go to whentheshifthitsyourplan.com, it'll take you to the video. You can download the ebook. It's free.
Okay, thanks. There was one thing that I wanted to say is, since we've talked about the pandemic so much and jobs and adaptability, one thing I do like, the thing that got hit the most were some of my favorite things, which is really, it's sad on my part on that it happened, is yoga studios,
Hmm.
which I loved. So, are you into yoga at all?
I am not. I should be, but I am not.
Well, I don't know how
But
they're
I did
going
go
to.
to the gym, so
Yeah, well, so I mean, I don't know how they are going to adapt or change, but yoga studios were, and then coffee shops,
yeah,
getting together with a
coffee
few
shops, yeah,
people at a coffee
yeah,
shop and not have to worry about sitting apart and mass, and like some of the coffee shops don't even have table. So just a couple of things to touch on that is unfortunate that happened right
yeah.
now from that.
And honestly, I think both of those are going to come back. I don't know how, if gyms will ever come back to the way that they were, because again, how many people bought Pelotons? How many people bought equipment? And now they got an investment at home. And I don't. And there was an article over the weekend I was reading in the Wall Street Journal, and it said that basically, there's going to be a huge decline because people are going to, hey, I spent $2,000 for this piece of equipment, and I don't have to take that 15 or 20-minute drive to go to the gym. I'm going to continue doing this. But there's a lot of people out there that maybe weren't going before, and they will try it. But things like yoga studios, I think they're going to, they're probably going to rebound faster, because there's smaller groups, and it was more of a specialty in and of itself. Coffee shops, there's only going to be a lot that are closed, but they're probably going to come back. They may look a little different. I think next year we're probably still going to be wearing masks, and maybe some distancing, but with the vaccine, hopefully they'll be around. But I think some of those norms will come back. just because we want to socialize. And with more people working from home, I think that's a way to get out of the house and go to the coffee shop again, which is how they originated. That's why people did it in the first place,
Right. Right.
for a lot of that. So I think those things are going to come back. We were big movie goers.
Oh,
Um, and yeah, I mean, at least once a weekend, we went to a movie, sometimes twice. I don't know if movie theaters are going to come back. And if they come back, am I going to be willing to sit in a dirty, broken seat, with a sticky floor? You know, and spend 15, $20 a seat to do that when I can do it at home, and get the same movie. I don't know. So I think there's some things that are going to be really, really hurt. But I think your yoga, my guess, we can talk next year or 2 years from now. My guess is your yoga studio and the coffee shops will be back.
that's what I should do. I should have you back on like next week and say, okay, here's 50 businesses. What do you think's going to happen? And then 2 years from now, I'll have you back on and we'll see if you predicted all those right.
Sounds good to me. I'm game.
I love it. No fear there. I love it. Well, thank you, Ira, so much. I appreciate you. Appreciate what you do. I appreciate you still growing and learning, and changing constantly, for others really, and yourself. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and stay safe, everyone.